Perfect. So, good afternoon. My name is Alex Walton. I'm actually going to start this in quite an unusual fashion. I'm going to start by telling you a story, and it's a story about 9 words that changed my life. 9 words that were actually spoken to me by a French doctor literally moments after I'd been ejected from a CT scanner. Those 9 words were do not move. Very dangerous. You've broken your neck. I should probably provide a little bit of context. In the 15 years since I broke my neck, the question that I'm asked more than any other is how did I do it? And in almost every single case, I've lied. I tell people that I was away snowboarding, and that is actually true. I was on holiday snowboarding. If they push for a little bit more information, I tell them that I went over a great big jump. And again, that is indeed true. I did go over a great big jump, but there is so much I'm leaving out from those 2 sentences. It was the last night of our holiday, and our little group was split evenly between those that were going out to the pub to enjoy their last night and those of us that were staying in the chalet to be clear-headed for the day's snowboarding ahead. Rather surprisingly, because I do like a beer, I was in the stay in the chalet group, but it was in no time at all that I could tell we were all getting a little bit bored and would probably be joining our friends down in the pub in no time at all. But then my wife had an idea that we all thought sounded great, but would leave us clear-headed for the day ahead. She turned around to our little group and she said, "Hey, let's go sledging." So that's how I found myself about an hour later in my snow gear, scooched up onto my snowboard with my friend Brian beside me. It all started out very sedate. We just went to the bottom of the slope, sat on our snowboards, scootled our way down, and then Brian spotted one of the snow ramps. It was a gradual incline, about 30 feet up one side, and a gradual decline down the other. And he scampered his way up and slid down. I thought, that looks more like it. I then spotted a second snow ramp slightly further up the slope. So I grabbed Brian, we ran our way up there, we clambered up to the top of the snow ramp and we sat there looking out over the town below us. The lights were sparkling, it was snowing, it was picture perfect. And I turned to Brian, I said, "Brian, I've got a great idea. Let's go down this snow ramp, we'll scootle down the slope and go over the snow ramp that's down the bottom there. It was about 50 meters below us." And Brian, give him his due, did look a little bit skeptical. And he turned to me and he said, "Do you not think we'll be going a little bit too fast when we hit that snow ramp?" I then uttered the single most idiotically incorrect sentence of my entire life. I turned to Brian and I said, "Brian, we will be lucky to get to that snow ramp. Never mind, get over it." And then nothing. I have absolutely no memory whatsoever of what happened next. In the seconds, minutes, hours, days, weeks, months, and years since the accident, I have never, ever been able to penetrate the memories of that moment, which is probably for the best. It was sometime later that my wife filled out some of the gaps. We set off and it was immediately apparent we were going too fast. Brian, being either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid, I'm still not entirely sure which one, went straight over the snow ramp. He went up the gradual incline, down the other side. He got away quite lucky with a broken wrist and a bloody nose. I, on the other hand, like to think I took the more sensible approach, and at some point coming down the slope, I decided to veer off to the side. But I was too late. I went up the ramp, off the side of it, flew 30, 40 feet through the air. My wife said to me that my arms were flapping, my legs were pedaling as if I was trying to cycle or fly my way out of trouble. And I did neither. I came crashing to the floor in a shattered and unconscious heap. I'd broken my C2. It's the second vertebrae down in your neck. There was about a centimetre gap through it, and it was broken in multiple places. I spoke to the French doctor afterwards. I asked him, "Are you going to operate?" He said, "We cannot operate. Your neck, it is in pieces." I'd also broken my pelvis in two places. I'd broken my acetabulum, which for the less medically inclined of you is the part of your hip that sits above the ball joint. And I'd broken my wrist, which actually did indeed need an operation. In the 15 years since I broke my neck, the second question that I'm asked more than any other is, did it change my life? And for a very long time, I thought the answer to that question was no. But a lot's changed for me over the last few years. And I can't help but reflect on that question and think about some of the things that happened to me after the accident. I look back and I remember the day just a few weeks after the accident where I wheeled myself up to a conference call with Hewlett Packard. I was in a wheelchair. I had my neck brace, which came over my head right the way down to my chest. I was exhausted from just sitting up for a few minutes. But I worked for a small consultancy company. And the one thing I knew is we simply didn't have the finances to pay me through my recovery. So I was pitching for some work that I could do from home. And we won that work. And it gave me focus and purpose through my recovery. I think back and I remember the day 3 months after the accident where I migrated from my wheelchair to a Zimmer frame. Excited with my newfound freedom, I thought I'd take the walk to the corner shop to get myself a loaf of bread. About an hour later, I returned home, absolutely exhausted, but I held that loaf of bread above my head like it was the World Cup winning trophy. I think back to the day 5, 6 months after the accident, where I went away with my wife. My specialist had told me I could briefly take my neck brace off. And I stepped into the shower in the hotel we were staying with, tentatively took the neck brace off, slightly terrified that if I slipped over, I might just die. And then let the water flow over me. I can still feel that now. The only person more relieved than me in that moment was my wife, because by God, I smelled bad after 5 months without a shower. And I think back and I remember the day 8, 9 months after the accident, where I went back to work on site at doing my consultancy role, a week away from home. At the end of that week, I was absolutely exhausted. I walked up to the train. I stood there, the first of many trains that would take me home. The doors opened and there was the sudden, dawning, crashing realization that I could not lift up my suitcase. It might as well have been an elephant sitting next to me. I was physically, emotionally shattered. There was nothing left in the tank. And then a stranger stepped forward, lifted my suitcase onto the train and helped me on. And they were the first of many strangers that helped me all the way from Bracknell to Reading, from Reading to Paddington, from Paddington to London, Liverpool Street, and then from London, Liverpool Street to home. When I think about this question, did it change my life? The answer to that is yes. And in every single way for the better. I am a more positive person about the people and the world around me. I am more appreciative, even if it is just having a shower. I am a stronger person, not physically, not by a million miles, mentally, able to deal with the challenges that life throws at me. I started this with 9 words that I said changed my life. I want to leave you with the 9 words that really changed my life and might just change yours. Those are: that which does not kill us makes us stronger. So thank you for listening for that. Appreciate that's a slightly a different start. I will do a belated introduction now. So first off, my name is Alex Walton. I am the idiot that broke his neck whilst sledging on a snowboarding holiday. Over and above that, career work-wise, a little bit about me. I am currently a senior manager within Vodafone Business. I lead our strategy and transformation function across our global delivery capability. I've been working within strategy and transformation at Vodafone for around about the last 6 years. Prior to that, I was pre-sales consultant that would lead some of our large managed service opportunities. Before joining Vodafone, myself and two colleagues, we co-founded a consultancy company. We ran that for around about 13 years, built that up to about 35, 40 colleagues, and we also had an office based out of Poland as well. And that experience was really foundational experience for me, gave me a lot of opportunities and a lot of experience that I'll be relying on and talking through a little bit as part of this session. The second part I just want to touch on is why I told you that story. So really what I want to do throughout the remainder of this section, or this session, is just to break that down a little bit and to provide you some context and information about why I made the decisions I did, just sort of look at that presentation in a bit more detail to demonstrate some of the lessons and some of the things that we'll walk through as part of this session. And just coming on to the purpose, why we're here today, it's really sort of 2 or 3 things I wanted to touch on. And the first one there is about impact. So within Vodafone, we've changed the way that we do our sort of annual reviews now, and it's all about driving impact. You have to demonstrate with your goals how you can drive impact. And I truly believe that presentations are one of those things that within a very short period of time can drive a massive impact. And great example of that, I was covering for my manager on one of our SLT sessions a few months back. We had a graduate who was coming on to just do a quick presentation about a portal. They came on, they introduced themselves, they provided some context, they demonstrated the portal, they answered some questions, really, really clear, really slick presentation, and then disappeared. And there was silence for a moment. And then one of the senior leaders piped up and they were like, bloody hell, they were brilliant. That 15 minutes, they drove so much impact. Every single person on there knew their name, knew who they were, would be able to recognize them moving forward. That's a massive amount of impact within a very, very short period of time. And there'll be a few of you on here might look at the impact in another way, a negative perspective, in that you can actually drive a lot of impact by delivering a bad presentation if it doesn't go to plan. And I'll cover a little bit of that and how we can manage that through the session. TED or work, so that initial 10 minutes is probably a bit more TED style, so a bit more free form, personal, but I recognize when you're presenting to some of your senior leaders, probably slightly different. You maybe don't want to talk in that way. So I'll cover those different elements. And just keeping our sort of my tenuous link of 9 words, I've built all of this around 9 rules. So we will talk through 9 rules to improve your presentation. And rule number 1, what's the point? What I'd like to do is just share with you a brief statistic to start with. So in a typical 15-minute presentation, it's estimated that people might remember 20 to 30% of content. For longer, it is even less. Being quite honest, if I think of a lot of the presentations I've done, sometimes 20 to 30% is a really optimistic amount, in all fairness. And if I think of this, I've got a whole hour here. How much of that hour are you actually going to remember? So there's one really important fact that you need to understand whenever you're presenting anything. If they're only going to remember that 20%, what do you want people to remember? You need to have that clearly in your own mind to be able to clearly articulate that to people you're presenting. So at this point, if it's possible, I am going to ask you to jump onto slido.com and put in the code there 2683044. I'm hoping if my technology works, we should be able to have a quick poll and get a bit of input from you. I'll skip on to the next slide. I've got the code at the bottom there if you haven't quite got it. So 2683044. In one word, I want you to describe what you think the core message was within that first 10-minute session that I did. 9 words. So in one word, can you describe what you think the core message was in 9 words? I've got a word cloud there, so hopefully if people can log on, we might get some input here. So direct, overcoming, impactful, impact, resilience. Okay. Okay, we've got a few people. So we've got rapport, feeling, impactful, impact, resilience, belief, persistence. So we've got quite a one, but I think the 3 core ones, we've got impact, direct, and resilience. Okay, still getting some coming in. Faith, message. So if I go back to my slides, this is always a slightly risky one when you do these things, because I've got one word and it may well not be the ones you picked. But actually, if I think of it, what was the core message that I wanted to get across? For me, it was resilience. That was the thing that when I think of that, I'm very much talking through the challenges I went through. It was a hugely difficult period for me, but actually talking through that has built a lot of resilience. And in my own mind, that was the key message. And I had 2 slides. One of them just said 9 words that changed my life. The second one was that message I left you with, which is what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, which is really focusing on that resilience. And I think if we look there, resilience about the second, third highest. So for me, I think that's a reasonable win. If I take that a little bit further and I've got a longer session like this, it's much more challenging. I can't boil this down to one word that I want to get across in a 60-minute session. So really, if we think about how you can structure your message and have that clarity, there's a quote there: presentations that have a clear structure and a central theme are more impactful. So if I think more broadly about beyond the first 10 minutes and this 60-minute session, my aim for today, really, I've got a clear structure that I'm working around. So I'm building this about improving your public speaking skills, but I'm structuring it around 9 rules. I want you to be engaged. So I'm using different techniques, the questions, other elements as part of this to keep you interested through that period. And my measure of success at the end of this, if people can take away 2 or 3 usable tips, I'll be more than happy. Rule number 2, slides. Less is more. So really, there's 2 key elements here. The consideration that you should always have is the moment that you flash up a slide on the screen, you are distracting people from yourself. And really, the key thing that you want to be doing from a presentation perspective is the words that you are speaking. You want people to be engaged with you, not necessarily reading the information on the screen. If there's a lot of data you need to get across, maybe that's a document you send rather than something that you are presenting. I think the second element is that when you have a lot of information on a slide, not only is that distracting from what you're saying, but it's also difficult to consume all of that information. If we go back to that statistic, people only remember 20, 30%. It's the same for a slide with a lot of information. But I appreciate it's not as simple as that. So I'd like to give you a couple of examples of some slides I've used in different scenarios. So this first slide was an all hands that I presented at. It was a topic that I'd proposed. I had ownership of the slides, what I wanted to present. I was very clear about what I wanted to get across. I was talking about design thinking, and I wanted to explain to the business what it was, how we were using it, how it was relevant to them. And there's so much about design thinking. I could have had hundreds of slides. I had 15 minutes to fill, but I went with 3 slides. And my first one, what is design thinking? That slide, people can read it in less than a second, and it demands your attention. The moment they read it, what is this? Oh, well, what is it? And then I just step in and answer the question. People are waiting for me to speak and answer the question. If it's not broken, don't fix it. My next 2 slides, essentially, why am I telling you about design thinking? Making it about them, bringing them into the conversation. What's this relevant for them? How can design thinking help you taking that next step to say, how is this, what is it relevant to you on a day-to-day basis? My measure of success there was getting some engagement from the business and supporting them by running some of these workshops. I had 4 or 5 people reach out to me afterwards, ticking the box. That was a success. But I appreciate you can't always present things in that way. So I want to give you another example where I presented something to one of our senior leaders. It was around a program that we were running from a transformation perspective. And he loves to have a pre-read. He wants to take those slides, read the information, and understand what's being presented before it's presented. And that's fair enough. That's his prerogative. If I sent him a slide saying, what is design thinking? He would be apoplectic. He just does not want to see that sort of thing. He wants the data. So one example of the slide we sent is this one here. I've anonymized some of the data because it was specific to what we were talking through, but the broad principles are all in the slide there. So we had our company strategy, happy to share, that's focusing on customer simplicity and growth. Some of the higher level objectives that our program was aiming to achieve underneath. And there was 3 work streams that we were delivering. So automation, organizational propositions and offerings, all of it underpinned by some KPIs. Far too much data for anyone to consume all of that in one go. So my principle here is, what do I want people to take away from that? It's a bit like the earlier one. What is the things that I want to get across? And in this case, it was 2 things. I just wanted my senior leaders to know 2 things. The first one was that we'd thought about the strategy. I wanted to give them the confidence that we've looked at the strategy and that they felt this whole program was aligned to our broader strategy. So it wasn't about going into the detail of all the strategic elements. It was about giving that confidence. I knew the answer to any questions they might ask, but it was about providing them with that level of confidence. And the second thing, I wanted them to know there was 3 work streams, one about automation, one about the organization, and one about propositions. The details underneath, they're never going to remember all of those. They just can't take it all in. But if they can remember that we've got a program that is meeting our strategic objectives and has 3 work streams, that's probably enough. If I needed to go into more detail, I would probably break it down. So if I had to provide more information about each of those, maybe you take it as a build and you go through and you do those individual elements and you present each as if they're a specific slide. My last point with these, when you have a lot of data, don't read the text out. I think the one thing is you're assuming that people can read, and especially when you've got a lot of information like that. So my summary here, if you can, keep your slides simple, find the key message in your slides, never ever read your slides out, except when you want to read them out, because for the eagle-eyed of you, that's exactly what I'm doing now. I'm reading the slides out, but I want to drive some impact or I want to emphasize some points. I'm not reading out a paragraph of text. And the final one, keep it interesting by adding a picture or bringing a bit of yourself into it. So this picture here, this was when I broke my neck. It was about a few months after the accident. I was out shopping with my wife. She found a sign on the shelf and she handed it to me, stepped back and took a quick photo. That was the photo she took. I'm happy to say we are still happily married. She hasn't found that next husband there. But the point here for me is that was a hugely serious time in my life. But it doesn't mean I had to be serious about it. Humor was one of the things that got me through that. And that connection, that humor, you can bring it to any presentation. The more you can bring of yourself and make that human connection, even in a business presentation, makes it more interesting, makes it engaging. Rule 3, find your So this is the point where I'm really aware of every are that I say, and I trip over it. So This is all about those filler words that everyone uses. I use them all the time, whether it's an 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 a you know what I mean. It's those things that we all use. But the key point really is that too many of them can really distract from what you're presenting. So there's a few things that you can do to try and reduce those. First one, preparation. If I look at these two presentations, and this is how I think of it, the first 10 minutes where I talked about my accident and the remaining section here, that first 10 minutes I have practiced many times, and I guarantee there's less ums and ahs in it because I've been through and practiced a lot. This, I'm reliant a bit more on the slides and having a structure, so I haven't run through it as many times, albeit I have. And there probably will be more ums and ahs, but it's still hopefully not a distraction. Second part there, you could take a pause whilst you're talking, maybe slow things down. Actually, I use that at the beginning of my session. I'm much more deliberate about my words, and you can reduce your ums and ahs. Generally, I find my style, I like to be a bit more upbeat and that side of things. So I'm happy that I throw in the odd occasional pause, filler word, but that is something that you can use when you are presenting if it's becoming a challenge. And then the second part, awareness and feedback. So I attend what's called a Toastmasters group, which is every couple of weeks. It's like a public speaking group, and you go there, we do practice and other bits and bobs. And in each of the sessions, there are a number of roles that people take as part of that. And one of those roles is an R counter. And what the R counter does is they have a little bell, or they have a little squidgy toy or some sort of thing that makes a noise. And at certain points through the evening, when people are presenting, if they have a pause word, an 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 ah, they squeak the toy or they ring the bell. And it's not about distracting people or putting them down. It's about raising the awareness. And then at the end of that session, what they do is they have a little note they've taken and they provide feedback. They give you the feedback to tell you when you're doing it. And it's massively invaluable if you can get that and get some feedback from someone to point those things out, because often you won't see it yourself. Rule 4, bring it all. So here's a few facts about presenting and giving a good presentation. So impact research suggests enthusiastic speakers are more competent and trustworthy. Smiling can make a presenter appear more approachable. Confident body language can increase audience retention by 20%. Great things sound super easy, but sometimes it isn't as simple as that. And I'd like to drop back onto our Slido if we can. I'm going to go onto the next poll, and I would like to ask you whether you consider yourself more of an introvert, more of an extrovert, or you're either somewhere in between, you're not really sure, or yeah, I think, is it ambivert is the in the balance. So okay, wow, we've got so 11, 12. We've got quite a lot of I'm not expecting many questions at the end from our introverts, so only joking. So we've got a bit of a shift to the introvert side of things. So thank you for that. So if I go on to some preconceptions that ChatGPT told me about being an introvert. Introverts are shy. Introverts dislike people. Introverts aren't good leaders, can be aloof, can't be public speakers. And in every way, I disagree fundamentally, because I'm 100% on that introvert side of things. I don't consider myself shy, particularly. I don't dislike people. I have a team of people. I don't want to say whether I'm a good leader or not. I can be a little bit aloof sometimes, to be perfectly honest. So maybe there is something in that one. And I'm here talking about public speaking. So I think that disputes that point there as well. And really, for me, this is what being an introvert looks like. It is about where I gain my energy from, as simple as that. I need that time to reflect and gain some energy. And the relevance for this was something I found on my socials, which really brought it home to me. And this is about my experience. So 9 till 12, psyching myself up for a very important meeting. 12 till 1, very important meeting. 1 till 5, recovering from very important meeting. And it's probably an exaggeration, but the reality is there is so much truth in there. And even if I think of this session, so beforehand, I've booked out time before this meeting just to prepare myself for it, just to make sure I'm mentally there, sit with it. I'm presenting, I'm bringing it all, I'm 100% here in this moment. But afterwards, I'm going to have to take some time to reflect, whether it's gone well, whether it's gone badly, what things I might have done differently. I need that time afterwards. So if you're presenting, if it is important, make sure you take that time for the 68% of you that are introverts. So do what you need to do. For the other 32% of the extroverts, honestly, I can't comment because I just don't know. So rule number 5. What's the story? So there's a statistic here, and this is 8 seconds. Now, this is, in theory, according to a 2015 Microsoft study, and it actually went down from 12 seconds previously. This is the average human attention span. So the reality is you are fighting to keep people's attention when it's drifting every 8 seconds. And how true or the reality of that, I can't say, but there is a truth that you are fighting to keep people's attention, and never more so when presenting virtually. So if you're sitting in a room, people are less likely to just go and do something different. But when you're virtually and on cameras, they've got a phone, they've got emails, they've got so many things that can distract from the presentation. So what can you do? There's many different things, but if I think of a few key elements, have a hook, tell a story, make it personal. If I think back to that first 10-minute session, the first few words I said were, I brought it in and said 9 words that changed my life. Do not move, very dangerous, I've broken my neck. There's my hook. I'm trying to hopefully set out something that is intriguing, interesting, and will draw you in. Tell a story. I started again that first 10 minutes and said, I'm going to tell you a story. People like a story. Make it personal. Make it about you. Show some vulnerability. And a lot of you will look at that and say, hang on a minute, if I've got to present 15 minutes on the latest data and analytics or something like that, that's hard to do. But even in any business presentation I'm doing, I try to bring out, is there some way I can make it personal? Is there some way I can tell a story? Because that makes it more memorable and more engaging. Rule 6, keep it simple. So I've got one slide for this section here. If you can't explain it to a 6-year-old, you don't understand it yourself. Keep your presentation simple. For me, this is hugely important. The moment you start using acronyms or complexity, if you're speaking to a broad audience, they are immediately stepping away from what you are saying because they don't understand. And one of the other elements is never more so than when presenting to senior leaders. I see it time and time again with my team and other people. They seem to think that when a senior leader moves up the organization, they hoover up all of the knowledge underneath them. And they go and present to those senior leaders as if they know the complexities of what they're working on. And the reality is nothing is further from the truth. They don't know those details. So if you're presenting to your senior leaders, treat them like 6-year-olds, because I certainly do with mine. Rule 7, practice. Rule 7.1, practice more. The single best thing you can do to improve your presentations is practice. And I want to be really clear about what this looks like. I had one of my team the other day who we're working on his presentation styles. He said, I've been practicing it. And I said, talk me through that. What does it look like? And he's like, I think it through in my head and I think it through and then I'll deliver it. That's not practicing it. Practicing it is sitting, standing, and then talking it out exactly as you will do in that situation. And the amount of times I've thought through a presentation in my head, hundreds, thousands of times, but then when I talk it out loud, I'll fall over the words. The slides aren't in the right place. So when I think of this session here, that first 10 minutes where I talk through, I've practiced that 50 or 60 times, end to end, saying it through. I know every beat and every word of that. I've presented it in multiple different situations, so I've had to use it a few times, but I absolutely know it inside out. And that is me standing there talking out loud exactly as I would do. This broader session, it's a bit more challenging to carve out an hour and practice it many, many times. But I have run through it end to end on several occasions, and I've taken little chunks here and there. So if you've got an important presentation, you owe it to yourself to practice it and properly talk it through. Rule 8, know your stuff. To be very clear, the times where presentations haven't gone well for me are usually because I'm talking about something I'm not quite as confident or comfortable with. And actually, as I've got older now, I'm much happier in actually just saying, if that's an area I'm being roped in to present something, if I don't have that confidence, if I'm not comfortable, if it's somebody else's slides, I would either prefer to rewrite the slides, do it differently, or even not do that. And I think there's another key part is I genuinely believe it's a privilege to present. One of the commodities that we can't buy more of is time. You're giving me 60 minutes of your time. It is genuinely a privilege to present. I want to make sure that I know what I'm talking about and give you the best experience possible. So if you're not comfortable, if you're not confident, take a bit more time, learn the subject, push back on maybe you don't even do that particular presentation. Rule number 9, nerves. So this is one of the biggies. And I'd like to, again, just get a little bit of a poll just to understand where some of the audience are. So if we go into our Slido one last time here, I'd like to know, on a scale of 1 to 5, how nervous are you about presenting? 1, not at all. Up to 5 is terrified, avoid presenting at all costs. Okay, so we've got quite a few. Okay, got still some coming in. So 17% avoid at all costs. Well, 15%. 38% are at a 4, very nervous about presenting. So that leads us quite obviously into this fella here. And for those of you who aren't quite as au fait with the Marvel Cinematic Universe as I potentially am, this is Dr. Bruce Banner. And he's also known as the Incredible Hulk. And this is taken from the first Avengers movie. So in the background, there's a huge, great big alien that's been flying around and smashing up New York. And at this point in time, Captain America has turned around to Bruce and said, Bruce, now would be a really good time to get angry, because when he gets angry, he turns into the Incredible Hulk and runs around. And quite frankly, the Incredible Hulk smashes up New York worse than the aliens, but that's a whole other conversation. But the principle is, at this point in time, Bruce Banner turns around to Captain America and he says, Cap, that's my secret. I'm always angry. And that's my secret when I think about presenting. I'm always nervous. I am a 5 on that list there, without a shadow of a doubt. And I want to be clear again about what that means to me, what that looks like. And the best way I can do is, if I go back a few years to when I was having a change in my career at the time, and I was going from being what was an independent contributor to a line manager. And at the time, it was part of an organizational change. It was very much we were moving to an agile model. And the idea was I was taking on a load of people, but it was going to be this squads, tribes, and chapters, and I wouldn't have their operational accountabilities. So I left work on the Friday, happy as an independent contributor, rolled in on Monday with about 25 direct reports, each and every single one of them looking to me to define their operational accountabilities. Because I don't know about you, but some things often don't work out as planned when we do these organizational changes. And it was a hugely overwhelming period. I didn't have the faintest idea what I was doing. And about a week in, I had to do a presentation to the team. So it was a half an hour. I really wanted to set out what we're doing from a transformation perspective. And I wanted to introduce myself and to give them the confidence I was the right person to see them through the choppy seas of change. So I literally had a slide about me, and we came on the call. We had a couple of minutes of preamble and talk. And then I flashed up my one slide about me. And I started talking, and then it happened. It was like two giant invisible hands came down, grabbed me round my chest, and squeezed all of the air out of my lungs. I simply could not speak. I could not get my words out. I was stammering and stuttering. All of a sudden, all of the thoughts in my head just literally exploded out. There was nothing there. And then all of a sudden, they came flying back in. And all I could see was the utter car crash that was a presentation where I was presenting one slide about myself, and I couldn't even get the words out. I managed to bumble my way through about 4 or 5 minutes, and then somebody interrupted me and asked a question, and it snapped me out of it. I was able to answer the question, I was able to step back, and I was able to talk it through from there. But when I think about presenting, when I start every presentation, when I started this presentation, that's my fear. That's the thing that I worry about will happen. So how do I manage my nerves? For me, I know the point of my presentation, simple slides. I give it 100%. I'm aware of my pauses. I tell stories. I keep things simple. I ensure I know what I'm talking about. And most importantly, I practice. Which leads us back to this fella, who is actually now not Bruce Banner or the Incredible Hulk. He's kind of this is about 75 movies later. He's now sort of come together, and he's a sort of Bruce Banner, Super Hulk type of person. But he's now a true superhero. He could control his strength. And this is what I genuinely believe. This is the truth. 100%. My nerves are my superpower. They are the thing that make my presentations stand out. They're the thing that makes me practice more and more. So for those of you who are a 4 or a 5 and nervous about presenting, remember that. That's your superpower, and I would love to see what you can do with it. One last thing, because we have a rule number 10, which for the observant of you, will realize we were only meant to have 9 rules. But rule number 10, break the rules. There are no rules. It's probably the most important one, because the single best thing you can bring to any presentation, the unique thing, is you. And the best example I can give you of that is if I go back to my days consulting, and we had an opportunity to present at a HP Hewlett Packard conference. There was maybe 300-400 people at the conference. And for a small consultancy like us, it was a massive opportunity. And I'd been wheeled out to do the presentation, because I was always wheeled out to do these types of presentations. And the only downside was we'd been given the topic of best practice in IT, which literally is the most boring topic you could possibly find. So I was thinking about ways that I could make it a bit more interesting, maybe tell a story. I was going to reference like some sort of disaster like the Titanic, and say maybe they didn't follow best practice and this is what happened. But a few weeks before, I'd been away on a sort of work retreat and done a presentation to our little consultancy company in the team. And I'd brought into there one of my personal interests, which was magic. And I did a magic trick. And there's only a small group of us there. And I say magic trick, this was something that took maybe 18 months to learn. There was a lot to it. It was quite complex. There's a lot I had to remember. And so a few weeks before our presentation, I remember really well, our co-founder, Steve, one of the co-founders, came over to me, and he was Alex, and he sat down next to me. He put his arm around me. He said, Alex, the conference. I was like, yep. He says, you've got to do the magic trick. I said, well, what's that, Steve? He's like, Alex, you've got to do the magic trick. I was like, Steve, I can't do the magic trick. No one goes to a conference and does a magic trick. In the history of Hewlett Packard IT conferences, there's never been anyone that's got up on the stage, got out a pack of cards and said, I'm going to do a magic trick. And he just looked at me and said, Alex, you've got to do the magic trick. So I did the magic trick. And I remember it so well. I've never been as nervous in my entire life. There was so much I have to remember, and there was so much that could have gone wrong. But about halfway through that presentation, I suddenly realized, hang on a minute, I've got an envelope over there that's got a prediction in. I've got a volunteer over there who's given me a number. And I've got another volunteer over here with a pack of cards, and he's about to count to that number and reveal the card that is predicted in that envelope. And every single person in that room was sitting on the edge of their seat watching me on the stage. I strutted around there. I think I even did a little bow at the end. I was that excited. And it was about 4 or 5 years later. I remember sitting at a customer site, and there was a guy looking at me, and he just had that little look, and he was like, ah. And then he came out, he's like, hey, aren't you the magic trick guy? And that's the thing I want to leave you with. Break the rules. The thing that you can bring to your presentation is you. That's when you can drive true impact. So try and remember, be the magic trick guy, or probably more relevant to this audience, be the magic trick lady. And on that note, I shall wrap up. I've got a very quick summary. I don't know if we can send out some of these slides, so I've got a bit of a summary there. But are there any questions that anyone has? Nope. Is that Meg?
Meghna.
Meghna. Hi there, Meghna.
Hi, Alex. It was really engaging, and thank you for bringing in the work side of presentation, because I think what I struggle with is making that impactful. And I think at the moment I'm looking for a next role, and most of my interview process at some stage involve presentation to the C-suite. I think that's the bit that I struggle with, because I've been given a brief, which is like a one-page brief. I have to come up with some slides, and I try to keep them less content heavy. But then when I'm presenting, I'm almost so nervous that I'm not myself fully, and I know where I am not giving my best to it, even though I have practiced it. So any tips?
Well, I think, like, from a nerves perspective, for me, and everyone is different, but the best thing I have found is always practice. And I do think it comes down to the more you can practice it, and the more realistic you can make that, almost talking it through exactly as you would want it, but doing it over again 5, 10, 15, 20 times, so almost to the point that you know it inside out. Because I always find when I am nervous, it's been those moments, it's almost like all of the thoughts just disappear from my head. Where am I going? But when I've practiced it a lot, it's sort of like I fall back on muscle memory. It's kind of, I remember this. And I'm also more confident with sort of pausing and taking a moment, because I know where I'm going to go. So it's that sort of practicing it, pausing it. If I think of the beginning of this session, I'm always nervous coming into it. I always start very slowly, because I often find I can talk quickly, and that causes me to run out of breath. That's when I get nervous. So I usually find the other element is when I start my presentations, I'm very considered in what I say, because it just helps me sort of ease into it, kind of thing.
No, perfect. Thank you. I think the thing I struggle with, which you've done really well, is I like when it's conversational. I like when people are interacting with me in it. And most of the interviews, even if I'll open it with, say, please interrupt me, please ask me questions, people normally don't. And that is something that throws me out.
Yeah. Irana, is there a question there as well? Oh,
yes, thank you. Actually, you just said something that I really liked, because I recognize myself in what you just said. Speaking quickly, I do that when I get nervous. I just start increasing the speed of my speech, and then I throw in a bad joke, and then I start talking about my childhood or something, and it's until I get like a little bit of focus again and go back to what I was planning to say. So I recognize myself in that, and thank you for the tip, and thank you in general for this session. It was really, really good. My one question would be, do you think, or how important do you think it is to adapt your presentation to your audience? Because you have mentioned different professional audiences, but I'm also thinking cultural, for example. If you present to someone that speaks your language and is from a culture and it can be company culture, or it can be an actual, I don't know, very different country with different culture. Yeah, you see, this is what I do. I get nervous and then I start talking about my childhood.
It's a great question, actually. I think it's one of those things. That there is always different nuances, different types of presentations. I think one of the things I always try to do is going back to that keep it simple point. And I sort of believe if you keep things simple and as accessible as possible, you actually cut across a lot of the different, maybe not all of them, but quite a lot of that sort of different element, and whether that's cultural, but also from a role, from a seniority level and that side of things. So I do feel that, broadly speaking, just making it as simple and as accessible for everyone can really cut across that. And probably the only other element, I also think, where you make it personal or vulnerable or that side of things, I actually think that again can cut across a lot of cultural divides. If you're sort of trying to build a personal connection, I think that can, that can be quite broad from an engagement point of view. Fern, I think, were you next?
Yeah, I think my question is actually pretty much the same as Irina's, so you might have to repeat yourself a bit, but I find it very difficult to strike a balance of wanting to have lots of information on the slides, particularly if I'm going to send them out, but also not wanting it to be information overload on the slides, because I do just see people reading it, which is, a balance I find particularly difficult. So any tips around finding that balance?
Yeah, I think, and sort of mentioned some of that it is hard because there are slides that I will do, and those ones I gave where I can talk on an all hands, and it's just what is design thinking. That's my ideal. Yeah, that's great. But there are other ones where I have to create something that has a lot of content and has a lot of data, and I find that it is a challenge to present. But I think then I do come back to, when I'm presenting that, I would look at that and say, actually, what do I want them to take away? Because it can often just be too much there. And really, then it's almost thinking through in your own head, okay, how do I focus it onto this particular element? If I look at that slide, is there a number on there? We've hit 90% of our sales target. There's a lot of nonsense for the rest of it. But actually, if I want them to walk away with one thing, it's that thing there. So at least you have that clear in your own head. And then you can sort of shape a little bit of the conversation around that. But it is a challenge. Definitely recognise that as well. Kaylee, you've also got your hand up.
Hi, thank you. I was just wondering if you've got any tips around the imposter syndrome side of it, that sort of feeling that you don't have the right to be the person giving that presentation, maybe because the people you're presenting to are above you, or are you really the one with enough knowledge, even though you do know your stuff, to be the one up there talking?
Yeah, and I have struggled with that in various guises over the years. I think there is an element coming back to that point of it. For me, it is a privilege to present. So there is that part of questioning yourself if you are, you know your stuff, and it is that confidence in actually, yes, I do, because there have been times where I've presented on things where I just don't, for whatever reason. I've been stuck out on a limb, and you've got to do it, and it's like, actually, I'm just not as comfortable. And you see certain bits where you sort of skip over it, and because you're just not as clear. And like I say, as I've got older, I'm much more confident in either, oh, look, I need to understand that, or I will push back, or wherever. So I think the first part is really being confident on that. And then I think the second part is really, it's about coming down into sort of, that pushing yourself out of your comfort zone, practicing it, just sort of building up that confidence to take the step and just go for it, sort of thing. So I think practice and building up the confidence, maybe doing it in different situations, presenting to different people to sort of build up and just gain more and more confidence. I'm a massive believer in radical candor from a feedback perspective. So I think to build your own confidence, get feedback from people, and continue to improve in that way can be a great way to help build that confidence.
Thank you.
Cool. Very quickly, I'd like to take the opportunity to sort of plug a couple of bits. So I'm on the platform as a mentor. I am also qualifying as a coach at the moment. So if anybody's interested in any coaching, I'm sort of offering that as a pro bono to get my hours up in the skills. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. I think I'm on the system, or like I say, I'm also on the mentoring system. So plugging Reed there as well, Kevin. And then the final bit, I'd be remiss if I didn't at least flag, you can buy my book, The Kind Mind Method, at Amazon. It's essentially a simple thought process that I created, which has helped me manage negative thoughts as such. So some really good positive feedback that I've received on that. So I'm always terrible at promoting these things, but whilst I've got 20 seconds, I thought I'll plug it. And I will stop sharing and hand over to you, Kevin, just to wrap things up, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Alex. As exceptional as always, mate. Thank you very much. So, obviously, you've had great questions from the audience, so you know that everyone was very engaged. You don't need me to tell you how good you are at public speaking, mate. Just want to say absolutely thanks again for taking the time to come out and share your experience with us, and we'll have you back anytime you want to.
Brilliant. No, thank you very much. Really appreciated the time and the engagement from everyone. So yeah. Thank you very much. Have a good rest of the day.